So just to kind of give a bit of an overview for this evening, this web conference is exploring the common challenges for those who are leading vestries and offer some basic practices for effective vestry leadership. We're specifically looking at those who are in the leadership roles of vestries is really our focus for this evening, i.e. Who clergy members, directors, or vicars, particularly those who are perhaps more recently ordained, those who are serving as wardens, and are going to be leading others within the vestry. But also this has some very practical applications for everyone who's on the vestry. So for those of you who are entire vestries joining us, or who may be recent to the vestry, there will definitely be some very practical things for you to take away from this as well, but know that our focus is really looking on those who are going to be looking to be bringing new people on board, organizing, and putting all of those practices together. Or you can also look at this as a potential notes for when you might want to be stepping up to the plate as junior or senior warden of your vestry too. So first we'll be covering the understanding the role and responsibilities of the vestry, both for your own leadership and for the entire vestry to understand. Then bringing the vestry together, again, both for new and returning members, with practices for how the vestry operates, spends its time, and making time and space to grow together. Then we'll be offering 3 leadership practices that we feel are particularly important to those who are leading vestries, for a well-functioning vestry, but also for well-functioning leadership teams within your entire congregation. And then finally, we'll be looking at stuff to be thinking about to be building up your toolbox for all of your vestry members and offering some resources that we would just like to highlight for you that we think are particularly useful. We'll have time for questions and comments and discussion during this web conference, but please, at any time, if you have any questions or comments, take advantage of the chat box, which is right now just on the left-hand side of your screen. Miguel and I will be monitoring the chat box throughout this web conference, and we'll remember to try and get around to all of your questions. So if something pops in your head, don't hesitate to go ahead and put it in there. Sometimes we can get to that even during the presentation, but we'll definitely want to get around to that when we take a couple of breaks. So with that, we would like to, before just jumping in, ask you all a few questions, just kind of get a taste of who's out there, what everybody's done, your background. And the first poll, which has just been pulled up, yay, someone's already clicked through, is what is your experience on the vestry? Just get an idea if you're very, very, very new, if you've served for a number of years. Oh, wow. Someone who's been over 10 years on the vestry. We applaud you, faithful person. Okay, I know there's more all y'all out there that can do that. You can click on the button right in the middle of your screen for the survey. And looks like a couple more people are putting that out there if you just want to go ahead and press in the middle. See, a few people are typing it into the chat, which is cool too. Oh yeah, and the groups too. Sorry about that. So with that, we'll just kind of get this idea of some of the individuals. With that, let's go ahead and flip to our next question. Which is how you would describe your experience on the vestry. Okay, again, we have some people with a good amount of experience on here. Nobody's completely new to this time around. Sometimes, especially in January, February, we'll get a lot of people who are just brand new to the vestry, so this is just helpful for us to know. Let's go ahead and bring up the last question. And which is what's your role on the vestry? We'll see you've got a good amount of wardens on here, a lot of vestry members in general. And no treasurers. Huh. And yay to the two secretary clerks out there. I love being the clerk on the vestry. It was a great position. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for the information. That just helps us get an idea for some of our focus for this evening on some topics that we'll spend more time on. So thanks again. With that, I'll hand it over to Miguel.
Great, thank you. So you may be asking yourself, why is there a picture of an armoire on this slide? Well, it has to do with the history of how our current vestry came to be, which I'll just want to touch on very briefly. Beginning the Church of England, the annual election of church wardens took place during Easter week. It was a simple process. All adult male parishioners would crowd into the room where the clergy would robe, a room called the vestry, to hear accounts of the past church wardens and elect their successors. Later in the Episcopal Church history, in Virginia, parishes became so large that it was impossible to crowd all the voting members into one robing room, and so they developed the practice of electing 12 representatives for life. So let me repeat that. The original term was for life. So I hope you don't feel like you've served an entire lifetime already on the vestry. Thankfully, we do not elect vestry members for life anymore. Also, thankfully, we've expanded our understanding of who can have voice and vote. It's not just adult members, and who can be elected to serve on the vestry. Of course, today vestries are made up of many people from our congregations, and I want to just note, depending on your diocesan canons, and you should be in touch with your diocese about this, there's also the potential for vestries to include youth. So some dioceses include provisions by which a youth, so not a young adult, a youth could actually serve on the vestry, and you'll want to, if you are interested in having a youth on your vestry, you can find out more about that through your diocese. Today, vestries are usually elected at the annual parish meeting. There is a range of sizes of, oh my gosh. Of sizes of vestries. It's fairly common for vestries to range between 6 to 12 members, depending on the size of the parish. Another note, one practice among many small churches is to actually trim the size of the vestry so as to not have all of one's core volunteers absorbed in the vestry itself. So it if you can trim it to 6, depending again on a lot of factors, you can then spread out a little bit your core leadership throughout the church. So whatever the size of the vestry, in all cases, vestries serve as the legal representative body of the parish regarding all matters pertaining to its corporate property. The rector of the parish is the presiding officer of the parish. The rector of the parish is the presiding officer of the vestry. And I want to make an important note here, which is not to say that they necessarily need to lead all vestry meetings. The former bishop of the Diocese of Texas, Claude Payne, advises rectors to consider training the senior warden or another trusted member of the vestry to facilitate the regular meetings. In Bishop Payne's words, this allows rectors to focus on the matter at hand rather than how well the meeting is being run, to note body language, to intervene when necessary. There are usually 2 wardens on a vestry. The senior warden leads the parish between rectors and when the rector is present, is supposed to be a source of support. The junior warden oftentimes has special responsibility over church property and buildings. Some vestries will elect a treasurer and clerk, and these officers may or may not be themselves vestry members. So that's some basic information about the history of vestries and the composition of vestries. But what do vestries do? Broadly speaking, a vestry helps define the mission of the congregation and carry out the mission of the church, as described in our Book of Common Prayer. Vestries also explore where God is calling the congregation at this particular point in time. It has special responsibility in selecting rectors, in nominating individuals for holy orders. It manages the resources and finances of a congregation, and it ensures effective organization and planning for a congregation's year of programming. And I want to note that definition comes from the Episcopal Dictionary of Terms. So let me start my webcam again and go into more details about this. And we'll begin with the canons, the church-wide canons. As you can see from this slide, vestries have 4 canonical functions that they are supposed to carry out for a congregation. Broadly speaking, the first 2 relate to making sure that a congregation is being good stewards of their property and finances. And the second 2, interestingly, relate to identifying religious leadership. Vestries play a particularly important role during times of clergy transition and in nominating people for holy orders. Just looking at third, when a parish is without a rector, the officers of the vestry are responsible for the continuation of worship, including the oftentimes very difficult work of calling a new rector, of engaging in that process of calling a new rector. So most vestries, however, go well beyond the 4 functions that are laid out in the canons. ECF encourages vestries to find a balance in their management and leadership responsibilities. And here we lay out what we understand is the difference. Management is essentially providing the operational stability, the day-to-day processes that allows the congregation to continue. Leadership oftentimes actually is somewhat disruptive and includes risk. It means recognizing a new direction that the congregation needs to go in. So healthy vestries will balance their role as managers and leaders. And we want to just break down some of the responsibilities into this management and leadership functions. So, as I said, vestries have important management responsibilities in that they are the body that ensures the day-to-day operations of the parish continue in good stead. These operational responsibilities include establishing policies and procedures for staff, making sure the congregation or the buildings are adequately insured, approving the annual budget, making sure that sound fiscal practices are carried out. So this is a list of common management responsibilities. Of course, we recommend that vestries do more than just attend to the management or operational aspects of a congregation. We believe that collectively vestries have organizational leadership responsibilities as well. Vestries work collectively to define a mission and vision for their congregation. They frequently include deciding together whether to initiate or eliminate a program. It's important to note that organizational leadership is frequently disruptive. It's about changing course, changing the strategic direction. So as an example, many vestries today are looking around at their neighborhoods and are seeing that there is a disconnect between the population in the pews and those in the neighborhood. And one of the questions that vestries face is, how can we make our congregation look a little bit more like our neighborhood? So that's an example of a question that requires a change in direction. My final point has to do with how some congregations end up balancing these managerial and leadership roles. Some vestries, and this is obviously easier in mid-sized or larger congregations, will choose to delegate managerial responsibilities to subcommittees, with some vestry representation on those subcommittees, so that the regular vestry meetings can instead be focused on questions of organizational leadership. This means that vestry meetings end up focusing more on asking and exploring where God is calling the congregation at this particular place and time.
So getting everybody on board, for those who are in leadership roles on the vestry, it's your responsibility to convene and bring everyone together. This ranges from ensuring that there's an agenda for each of the meetings to having a slate of candidates to be elected for the next annual meeting. Looking at the bigger picture, though, how your vestry functions, how your spiritual practices, how you operate, these areas are important for sharing a common knowledge and understanding of the vestry structure, its purpose, and its vision. So norms and covenants for vestries. This may be a new concept for some. Norms, simply put, are standards, typically for expected behavior. These can serve as a model for how your vestry functions. For example, our vestry meetings will be no longer than 2 hours. We will not have more than 3 unexcused absences a year, and we will adequately prepare for all meetings. These are expectations for how everybody is to participate and to be part of this operating body. And in covenants, this is where you can put norms together to form sort of a working document for that. The Bible, just to kind of take a broader step back, gives us examples made between God and God's people. There's examples of covenants between, we have the stories of God and Noah, God with Abraham, with Moses. You are probably very familiar with these stories. Walter Brueggemann, writing on biblical covenants, characterizes them as a way requiring risk, emotion, and solidarity, and permits us and requires us to think afresh about the character and business of the church. That is, the faithful community knows something about the world, hopes something for the world, and expects something of the world. Modifying this to think about the context of your vestry, I changed this to say, the congregation and members of the vestry knows something about the vestry, hopes something for the vestry, and expects something for the vestry. So putting this into a covenant, you'll be wanting to approach this as a living, working document that you discuss, you'll come to each year to be able to figure out what's working, what's not working. When things aren't working out, you'll want to make sure that you're holding each other accountable and you bring this up so that it's publicly addressed. Perhaps that needs to be done sometime mid-year. But these help to establish a framework for you so that when unhealthy practices come up, when people are being chronically late, when people are attacking others on the vestry, there's ways to be able to put a bit lid on that and to put some controls and know that this is not what we agreed to, this is how we want to function, and set an example for our congregation. And orientations. Do you know what your bylaws say? Do they reflect the current practices that you have in your congregation? Does everybody on your vestry even know what bylaws are and that you have a set of bylaws, or hopefully you do? Orientations are an opportunity to get everybody on the same page. We recommend doing 2 types of orientations annually, one for new members to the vestry and the other for the newly formed vestry after elections are held. Orientations can be done in a number of different ways. There is no one right way to do an orientation, and you very well may need to modify how you do this year to year depending upon the makeup of your newly elected members or your newly elected vestry. For new members, An orientation can be done within the context of a larger vestry orientation, but doing so outside of this can allow time for your members to get on board before really jumping into the sort of all the business and what's going on with the vestry, and to be able to take some time for questions and to begin to allow some space to process uh, what's the rules and the expectations and what's all going into this, especially if you have somebody who's newer to the church, your church, and especially if they're newer to the Episcopal Church. Some ideas for this could include plan a tour of your church building. You'd be surprised sometimes with what areas of the church people may not be already familiar with, what's hiding behind some of those closet doors and some of the resources that you have there, what goes on in the various parts of your church. But most importantly, you'll want to make sure you have documents and resources ready for your new vestry members with pertinent information about your diocese, your congregation, and community. This is all stuff that we'll talk about later in building up your toolbox and resources for your vestry. Again, for your newly formed vestry, it's an important time to be able to examine your norms and your covenant, and have time to look at the big picture issues that the vestry has been dealing with in the recent past, and that you'll be looking towards with her the next year of the vestry that you'll be discussing and looking at. Frequently, this is done in the context of a retreat, which we'll also discuss shortly. But overall, orientations help reduce confusion and misunderstanding and increase clarity of roles and responsibilities. So, hope to ask this to you all yourselves, but does your vestry begin with some sort of spiritual practice? My hope would be yes. If not, please make that happen soon. Many vestry agendas, though, do fall into the trap of making time for all their stuff that needs to get done, be it reports, updates, budget, building issues, etc. But remember the need for balance between management and leadership. To be effective spiritual leaders, we need to be focusing on the big picture. We do this by discerning what God is calling us to be and to do. And discernment, as we know, is an ongoing process, not a one-time thing that you check off a list. Spiritual practices ground us, they form us, and allow us to cultivate the time and space for these all-important holy conversations. We know these things can range anywhere from Bible studies, you can do prayer service, perhaps celebrate the Eucharist, have a discussion on a topical article from ECF Idle Practices, or watch a video on YouTube and have such as a TED Talk that might be of interest and have a discussion. It's pretty open-ended. There are a lot of options out there. Building this practice may be a bit awkward at first. Admittedly, some vestry members may not be comfortable with sharing and discussing theological reflections, or may initially resist this, feeling like it's taking away from the business of the vestry. Blair Pogue of St. Matthew's in St. Paul, Minnesota, spent 5 years working with her vestry to re-envision their role. One of the things that they began with was to start dwelling in Scripture at the beginning of every vestry meeting. And it wasn't without some bumps along the way. She shares in her Vestry Papers article, while some vestry members initially looked at their feet in awkward silence, within a few months, everyone was on time to vestry meetings so as not to miss out on what others had to say. When we began to relate the biblical text to budget discussions, we knew that we were in a new place. Think about how wonderful and powerful that is. The budget related to biblical texts. Awesome. So vestry retreats are often associated with vestry orientations. They can and do serve well for times of orientation. If you are using your vestry retreat for orientation, Lauren Mead it suggests in another Vestry Papers article, Bootstrap Your Vestry Retreat, to be sure to plan ahead and break your vestry into 3 groups, the senior group, middle group, and freshman group. This is under the presumption that you follow standard 3-year term for your vestry members. Keep in mind that you really don't want to bore the members of your vestry with going over stuff that they may already be familiar with. And nor do you want to be spending all of your time discussing business items and looking at this is an opportunity to basically have one gigantic vestry meeting. Lauren also shares that often vestry members report about experiences with vestry retreats is because a one-size-fit model has been used, where everyone is gathered for all points of discussion and the entire time is spent on policy and procedure. Be sure to spend time on spiritual conversations, but also to have some time for fun. Fellowship is an equally important part of having your vestry spend time together on a retreat. As Lauren puts it, such a time needs to be a bridge when we ourselves do some growing and find ourselves fed as persons and as disciples. I also encourage you to think of smaller times throughout the year that you can spend time on retreat, perhaps a workshop or a presentation or lecture that's going on in your community or your diocese. Retreats offer a chance for renewal and to be inspired. I love the way Rochelle Thompson relates this value, the value of retreats and spiritual growth with Newton's laws of motion, as you can see on the slide, that an object at rest will stay that way. A church without time to set aside for spiritual renewal won't renew. And for every action, there's a reaction. For retreat, there can be great advance. So all of these practices, orientations, to become familiar with the basics, your whole vestry on board with a mutual understanding of your roles, how you'll function in your norms and covenant, spiritual practices, etc. All of these make space for holy conversations that your vestry needs to be having and for discerning the vision for your congregation. Especially in an era where long-range, 5, 10, even 1-year strategic plans are no longer feasible, with things changing in ways that we can't even begin to envision that far down the road, it makes the faithful commitment to continual discernment all that more critical. With that, I'd like to invite any comments or questions that anybody might have.
And I think that given that we have 44 people on, I think it's probably easiest if you have questions to type them into the chat box. I'm afraid that if I turn on the audio, we'll just get a lot of audio interference in the background because everyone's phones and microphones will be on. So if you have any questions, clarification questions, please let us know in the chat box either now, and we'll try to get back to them as we go along. Let's just wait for a few questions, Brendan.
Mm-hmm. So Eileen's asked, how many retreats do you advise for the vestry on an annual basis? What really works best for you? Sorry to flip it back, so tables back to you on that one, but you yourselves will know what's really feasible for your vestry in terms of what sort of time commitments can be made, what the situations, particularly the job situations, what time can really be had for people to take off to be able to do something like this. But at least one significant retreat a year. That I would say is a minimum that you have with your newly formed vestry, so that you all can take some time, even if everybody knows each other and you have some people returning. It's just it's a different group. It's going to have different dynamics at a different it's a different sets of people at different points in time. you want the chance to have time to be able to have that formation and to have that fellowship and to be able to come together. So I'd say at least that one time, and to be able to fill in some additional times as you can throughout the year. Many places aspire for 2 longer retreats and to fill in some other smaller bits in between.
So someone asked about using subcommittees or other such things to get the vestry meetings more focused on leadership. The best resource we have on that is an article, Brendan already mentioned it actually, by Blair Pogue, and she describes the process by which they kind of arrived at that structure. There's another note from Elizabeth about youth on vestries, and this comes from Bronwyn Scove. I just put the link into the chat box. Youth on vestries, and she just talks about, you'll see in the resource, let me make sure that it's actually there. Yes, it's still there. It's a piece of legislation from General Convention about youth presence and kind of some processes for investigating that in your own diocese. Let's see. So say more. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. If anyone has thoughts on regular spiritual practices to start meetings, Brendan, I'm wondering if you can look up the recording of the webinar that Ella did, spiritual practices for vestry meetings. I think it's called. So there's a wide variety of things that you can do, and we had I think an entire webinar dedicated to exploring what vestries can do at the beginning. It's great to hear some people chiming in on what they do. I know many vestries will actually begin with an entire worship service or with an extended Bible study as well. Great. Okay, so please continue to add your questions in the chat box, and obviously we do have some resources and can call up, if we remember them, articles and tools, or just experience, obviously, so that we can learn more about that. And then while that's happening, I will go on to the next section, which is just about 3 leadership practices which we think vestries and actually all leadership teams in the church need to be focusing on, and hopefully we can clarify some of these as well. So let's begin with the often used term, focusing on mission. So the word mission is used in a wide variety of ways in the church, and oftentimes in a congregation it will describe outreach or social service ministries, as in mission outreach. So I want to be very clear that ECF uses this term in a slightly different way. We understand mission to be a relatively simple description of what it is that God is calling your congregation to do. So let's put aside for just a moment the oftentimes difficult task of creating a mission statement. I'm sure all of us have probably been in long meetings in which you're struggling to come up with a mission statement, and instead go back to the original question. When a vestry explores its mission, it is exploring what it is that God is calling the congregation to do at this particular moment in time. So I want to make a further point about how mission relates to vision. Mission describes what it is that God is calling us to do. A vision describes what the world will look like once you have completed your mission. So this is coming out of organizational development. These are pretty classic definitions of mission and vision. Another way of phrasing vision is painting a picture of the impact that you hope to make on the congregation or the neighborhood or the world. So whether it's formal or informal, you know, we need to be communicating and discerning our mission and vision at many different levels of the organization, and then communicating it from the pulpit, in our newsletters, in our website. The idea of focusing on mission, and I think part of the reason why this is so important is that oftentimes mission and vision are really key aspects of rallying a community around a sense of purpose, a sense of shared purpose, and a sense of why. Great. So I hope that clarifies, I think, some of this issue of focusing on mission. Another key practice is the difficult art of identifying and recruiting new leaders. And I want to begin with just a story, actually, of a conversation I had this week with a priest in the in Ohio, who has a growing congregation. And we had a really interesting conversation, and one of her pieces of advice that she will be sharing in a workshop is, don't put your best people on the vestry. So that's, I think, pretty striking. Instead, use your vestry as a leadership lab. She describes how she asks her strongest leaders to actually roll off the vestry and go lead new ministry projects or facilitate a particularly important committee. So what she uses her vestry for is instead seeking out first-time visitors, people who are fresh out of college, people with limited organizational leadership experience, and she takes a very active role in forming and mentoring these new leaders throughout their terms. And then the end result is that people are much more able to lead independently, ministries of their own. In fact, she told me how a young woman directly out of college served on the vestry and actually then listed her experience on the vestry of kind of knowing now how to navigate an organizational budget and frame a vision and mission on her resume, and it led to her getting a job. So that's a really great impact for this. So she has a very different understanding of identifying and recruiting new leaders to the vestry, and I just wanted to offer that as something that is, as an example that might be used in different places. How many congregations typically look for vestry leaders? One of my favorite articles is by Janie Kurt Morris called "Build a Healthy Vestry," and in Vestry Papers. And one of the things she describes is our typical recruiting patterns, which is outgoing members sometimes default to criteria that raise a red flag, and I'm quoting here. Do any of these sound familiar? He's retired and has lots of time on his hands, so I bet he'd be willing. She's one of our biggest givers, so we better ask her. Now, of course, we shouldn't avoid our biggest givers or retired people, but I just want to offer some slightly different criteria. We want to be looking for people who are drawn to the hopeful vision of the church that you've created. So we just talked about becoming more clear about where God is calling your congregation. Who in your congregation is excited about that? Are there people whose eyes light up whenever a sermon is preached on that? Are there people in coffee hour who express interest? If that is the collective vision of the community, and that's a big if, you want to be identifying people who are excited about that as well. Leaders are busy. This comes from the Diocese of Massachusetts and their Leadership Development Initiative, this insight. And they point out that there's a truism in community organizing which oftentimes goes against our practice of finding people with a lot of free time on their hands. And this truism is, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. They may not be able to say yes immediately, but because they're already engaged in their communities, in their work, and their family life, you want your vestry to benefit from all that experience and their expertise. So, having said that, I just want to note this actually goes in contradiction to the example I gave from the priest in Ohio, who actually would send that person into a different committee or to lead an initiative, and instead she looks for people with potential for leadership ability and kind of uses the vestry as a lab. We also want to be looking for people who will add balance to your team. So there are lots of ways of describing the roles, responsibilities, and kind of personality types of team members. This comes from Interaction Associates. I think it's a great model of what teamwork actually is. Teamwork is a combination of process, results, and relationships. And while individual members, there are very few individual people who can kind of do all three things well. You want your team to be able to do all three things very well. So, are you needing some results-oriented folks who will make sure that things get done on time? Do you need people who are interested in building relationships with outside community partners? Do you want people who will passionately explore how the annual Blueberry Pie event is produced and how to improve that process for next year? You want to have a team that includes gifts from all of those three areas. So this one seems obvious, but it's important. Giving responsibility versus tasks. And I want to go back to that conversation that I had with the person from Ohio. I mentioned that she puts her strongest leaders in charge of new initiatives or one of the more important committees. Forming new leaders for your congregation means giving people a balance of tasks and increasing responsibility. And we all know what a task is. All of us have been probably given a task either at work or actually in church. It's asking people to lick envelopes for the annual stewardship appeal letter. Assigning responsibility, on the other hand, is asking someone to lead or rethink how the entire annual stewardship campaign takes place. And I want to encourage all of us in the church to start to err on the side of taking a risk and assigning more responsibility than tasks. And here's why. Very often in our congregations, whether we like to acknowledge it or not, the understanding is that if you want to lead something new, we have to run through a gauntlet of menial tasks to prove ourselves worthy of a slight increase in responsibility. And then maybe only after 5 years of doing that faithfully will we, get to lead. And that seems to be a pattern that's set in. And obviously, I'm not sure it's working, I would say. So while there are positions where certainly that level of care makes sense, the role of treasurer, for instance, or anything having to do with care of children, there are a lot of instances of responsibility in which we create unnecessarily high barriers to organizational leadership. And so to the extent that we can, I think we should be looking at those processes. I think vestries in particular should be looking at those processes and asking whether or not those couldn't be simplified. And I think we need to be erring on the side of giving someone real leadership responsibility, not just tasks, and walking with them as they figure out how to fully live into that. Great. So therein ends your sermon for the night. So with that, let's go actually to our discussion mode so we can see more folks. And again, I think probably the easiest way, since we seem to be having some audio stuff, is through the chat box. And we will either try to respond immediately, email you later, or send a resource which we think will be helpful.
Yeah, Suze has a question about pairing or teaming up vestry members in committee structures. Uh, Generally speaking, we would advise against that. Why is because the vestry itself, the members of the vestry are not there to be representing constituencies. It's the responsibility of the vestry members in general to be aware of what's happening in the congregation. If it seems that people aren't as there are committees that are not being informed that don't seem to feel like their voice is being met. Definitely, people should be delegated to make sure that they're being in touch with folks on there, or inviting those committee members to participate in a meeting, or to reaching out. People should be involved in the ministries that they're passionate about, and not delegated to.
Yeah, I'm not sure I read that question in the same way.
Oh.
But maybe Suze can clarify a little bit more what you mean in particular. It may, Walter, thank you for that. If there are particular places that you want to have us talk more about, let us know. I think one of the questions around small churches, actually it's more opportunities for small churches, and again, this is very dependent on your diocesan canon, so investigate it, is whether actually to go back to the early form of a vestry, where there's an all-church vestry. So the vestry is actually the entire voting membership of your parish, and that will, a congregation will gather for worship, and then immediately afterwards, maybe in a few days, a year, will make decisions for the entire congregation. And that's an example that's actually quite historical as well, and it's an option in various parts of the Episcopal Church. Brendan, do you remember which diocese our article from All Church Vestry is from?
Eastern Oregon.
Eastern Oregon. That's possible in Eastern Oregon. It may be possible also in your region. Okay. It's weird. Wonderful.
Eastern Oregon, given their makeup of their congregations, they have numerous small rural congregations, and several of their congregations worked with their diocesan leadership to establish new canons, so that churches could switch from what would be considered now traditional vestry to an all-church vestry, which is actually the way things used to be historically, where all communicants in good standing are eligible for voice and vote in basically an all parish council meeting that would be constitute the vestry meeting.
Great. And I think so. There's a conversation about whether or not, right? There's a conversation in the chat box going on about the difference between having vestry liaisons to committees and vestry members who chair the committees. I would be interested in hearing from other folks who have liaisons or chairs about their experience with that. I think the point that Brendan was making, actually, Brendan, you may want to jump in, was just sometimes vestries will be, will have a representative from the choir, a representative chair from the youth, from the young adults. We'll have a representative from mission outreach. The concern that I think ECF has around that sort of model is not so much in the reporting structure, but whenever vestries, when that role is defined in a very narrow way, because the vestry ideally will take on the larger, big picture conversations about the health of the overall congregation. And so they sometimes having representatives from one particular section and a person feeling such strong allegiance to that one section will kind of obscure those bigger picture kind of organizational decisions, and that makes it harder. So that's exactly was my thought. I think it's a little bit different having a vestry representative on the committee instead of going the opposite direction. There were other questions. I will admit I was trying to understand, I was trying to frame in my mind the distinction. So let me try to get back to some of the comments. So just want to point out the example that Ron Gray mentioned. We have paired our vestry in some situations. Currently we have a program called Tending the Flock. Since we are a small congregation, 2 vestry are assigned 4 to 6 families, and we check up on them to see if they have needs or prayer requests once or twice a month. Ron, I'm wondering where you are from. And how long that kind of initiative's been in place.
Actually, as that's getting in there, I know we have some other questions that are out there. And please feel free to be in touch with us via email. We'll share our contact information shortly, but we just want to make sure we get around to sharing some resources and our contact info. We'll definitely be happy to answer your questions later on. Call us, email us, and definitely let us know. But we just wanted to provide some thoughts for building up useful resources especially for your new vestry members, and things that you'll want to perhaps review when your vestry gets together for your retreat, things particularly like your community demographics and trends, or reviewing your bylaws, which we actually have some really two great 2 out of 3 blog posts by Greg Seiler right now up on bottle practices about how bylaws have been really refreshing for their vestry, liberating them from being managers of the parish. Oops. But we'd like to point out the Vestry Resource Guide, which is available from Forward Movement and many other Episcopal booksellers. Vestries use this as a staple for being able to understand what the Ministry of Vestry is, has useful resources for reflections and Bible studies that are in there for you as well. How to put together Vestry Covenant, like we talked about in this evening's web conference, and navigating transitions in clergy leadership as well, and with a bunch of other resources. ECF Auto Practices, which we've mentioned and have shared various, look, Miguel just shared the Greg Seiler's post, which includes Vestry papers, our web conferences like this one, which will be recorded, and we post those to make available for free online. This is, again, free for everybody, and if you want to subscribe, you can receive Vestry papers and our monthly digest as well in your inbox. The Manual of Church Business Methods, which is available from the office, is very useful to have on hand, particularly when things get messy financially. You will want to turn to this and use this as a guide for your financial practices. And finally, the Episcopal Church's Office of Research. This is not as well known as I think it should be throughout the church. Congregation in the church, you can obtain reports on the average Sunday attendance and pledge and plate and baptized members for the past 10 years, and particularly could be useful for congregations is your community profile, which for better or worse is for a 3-mile radius for your congregation, but it's information that gives a bit of a snapshot that you have for free available the web link that you see there from the Office of Research. Finally, again, please feel free to contact us with any questions, resources you're looking for, any questions you might have from this evening that we were unable to get around to. This is our 3 of us from the Leadership Resources team. We'd be happy to be in touch. You should have a email in your inbox with a link to a survey, which we would encourage you to please fill out to let us know what you found useful, what you missed out, we're looking for. Your feedback is very valuable to us. This is how we shape our education events offerings, and these webinars we take this into account, we modify, we use this, and very much appreciate your feedback. And again, thank you everybody for coming this evening. We hope this is valuable and useful for your ministry, and we applaud you and wish you Godspeed in your ministry of vestry service.
Right. Thanks, Brennan. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. We'll be here, if you want to continue to ask some questions, we'll be here around till 8:15 or so. I hope you have a wonderful night. Great job, Brendan. That worked out well.